Sorry, this is
All right. Well, super excited for this talk, which is a great follow-up to our previous talk on DEI, which is the certainty trap, how certainty distorts our thinking on contentious issues, by Ilana Redstone. Ilana is an associate professor of sociology at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and a founding faculty fellow at University of Austin, Texas. She is the faculty director of the Mills Center and the co-author of Unassailable Ideas: How Unwritten Rules and Social Media Shape Discourse in American Higher Education. She has a joint PhD in demography and sociology from the University of Pennsylvania. She's also the creator of the Beyond Bigots and Snowflakes video series and the founder of Diverse Perspectives and Consulting. Thank you so much for being here, Ilana. Good to see you again.
No, it's good to see you. It's been a while, so it's good to be here.
We have to catch up outside of this.
Yeah.
Right,
So how can I go ahead?
I'm going to mute myself, take myself a video, and you have the floor, and you can share your screen if you want to share it.
No, I don't need to share my screen. Is it 20 minutes?
We have 25 minutes.
Okay, 25 minutes. So what would be helpful in terms of where to start? Like, do you want, just give me a little bit of a guideline, and then I'll go.
Yeah, you could start with the framework, this idea of the certainty trap. Do you want me to go off, or do you want to make it more of a discussion? What's better for you?
Let's have a discussion. I mean,
okay.
Let's have a discussion and jump in with questions. And if other people have questions, some of the stuff that I talk about tends to raise a lot of questions. So I'm happy to have people interrupt if they want to jump in, and if you don't want to hold it until the end, I'm totally fine with that. So I'm going to actually set a timer, because I want to make sure to leave some leave some time for questions at the end. So I'm going to set my own timer for 25 minutes. So in broad terms, like Jeremy said, I'm on the faculty at the U of I in the Department of Sociology, and what my work really is focused on is addressing this problem. So all of these issues around sort of political polarization or viewpoint diversity, including a lot of the issues around diversity, DEI stuff that the previous panel, I just caught the end of it, but that the previous panel was talking about. My focus is sort of that these problems are downstream effects of a problem in how we think. And so the space that I'm interested in working is at the source of the problem. And so by how we think, what I mean is, when it comes to heated and contentious issues, our tendency to demonize and judge people who disagree comes from, so this is the name of the certainty trap, is the idea, what Jeremy started out with, comes from certainty. And I try to be, I don't always succeed, I'm sure, but I try to be very precise with words. And so when I say that judgment and demonization always comes from certainty, I use the word always intentionally. I have tried to come up with examples where that doesn't apply, and it seems to always come back to certainty. Again, I'm talking about on heated and contentious issues when we judge or demonize people who disagree. And I will say, while I'm not making any claim of symmetry on the left and right and whatever, like I think that's not an argument that I don't even think it matters. I will say, I do think it's worth saying that it is something that affects, it can affect anyone. So I'll just give you one example. So if I think, here's just a simple example. So if I take the question of gun control, right? Like, so, and if I say, well, I think that, let's say that I oppose restrictions on guns. And so then I might say that, the person who favors restrictions on guns, they really don't care about freedom. They don't care about liberty. They really want to live in some sort of tyrannical nanny state. That would be one way of viewing it, right? On the other side, if I were someone who is favoring restrictions on guns, and I held the view that people who are opposed to gun restrictions, they really don't care about the children that are losing their lives in school shootings. That would be, so right, so in that case, I'm presenting a situation where it's symmetrical, but I don't mean to claim symmetry in some broader sense. And so it's that oversimplification, and it's sort of the reduction to like, you're either an idiot or you're, you know, a horrible person for disagreeing. And that comes from some either belief, value, or principle that we're holding on to as inviolable, as something that is this thing, whatever it is, this principle, this thing that I'm holding on to, I'm sure of it, and it can't be questioned. And so a lot of what I'm doing with groups, with students, et cetera, is saying, really, like, that's not, I mean, there's a lot of ways to make this argument, but one of the ways to do it is just that that's not really how the world works. Like, we don't, there is value in making explicit and naming the whatever our values are that we're holding on to. I can give you another example if it's helpful, but naming the thing that we're holding on to, like I am, you know, with the gun control example, making those values explicit that are driving that opinion, because once you've made something explicit, once you've named it, you can talk about it. You can have a conversation about it. So like with respect to the diversity panel that was just on, like all of the controversy that sort of swirls around DEI programming, well, maybe not, okay, so I'm going to be careful with my words, not all, but a lot of the controversy that swirls around DEI programming comes down to two sort of assumptions that don't get sort of talked about. One, which is a lot of what I heard of your panelists talking about, which I think is totally right, are assumptions about identity. Assumptions about how people think about identity, how people do think about identity, how people should think about identity. And we don't have any conversation. So those programs, most of them will start from the assumption that this is how we think about identity. And if you don't, this is how you should, right? Yeah. Where we sort of place race, ethnicity, gender identity, et cetera, you give it primacy. And we never step back to have the conversation and say, well, what does that mean? Like, how is that really the way we should be thinking about this? And that's one. And I know your panelists talked about that. And then the other one is, just in the DEI example, is about equality and inequality specifically. There are assumptions about, you know, the causes of and solutions to inequality that don't get, and my position and I'll stop for a breath a second, my position is not to say that these things aren't true. I actually don't feel like I wouldn't be comfortable sort of making a declaration about that at all. But what I am saying is, I don't think we can, I think that the problems come from when we behave as though we have answers to questions that we never bothered asking. Mm. And that creates, because people don't even understand, like a lot of people, I mean, I spend, you know, absurd amounts of time thinking about this stuff. And so if I had like a regular job that demanded my time and I wasn't thinking about this, I don't know that I would necessarily have at the front of my mind, oh yeah, that thing that's going on is, or that conversation or whatever is, it's making me a little uncomfortable. I'm not really sure if I feel right saying anything, but you may not even have the words to sort of express why, like, what is it about it? And so it's just completely broken down. And so that's the space that that's my sandbox.
Yeah, you know, so the way that when I hear you talk about this, the way that I think about it, it's almost like there's this spectrum, and on one end of the spectrum is certainty, and on the other end of the spectrum is curiosity. And so, like, where are you on the spectrum with relative to different ideas? And you could apply this to these sort of larger socio-political issues, of course, because that's where they really show up. But yeah, in my work too, they really also show up in just basic interpersonal conflicts. I'm certain that this person has this type of attitude, or I'm certain that this person is out to get me. I'm certain that this person is trying to undermine me. Like, and they get into this certainty trap. It really is a trap, and they can't get themselves out back to a place of like curiosity, where it's like, maybe they're not trying to do that. Maybe they're not as hostile or intentionally hostile as I think they are. Maybe they're doing something else, or they're not aware of it or something. I got to go find out. I got to remain curious and go find out. And I think it's so important to like, in all of our endeavors with interpersonal and intergroup ideas and relationships and dynamics, that we start moving ourselves towards curiosity rather than staying in this trap of certainty.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think that so a couple of thoughts. I would probably characterize the spectrum a little differently, rather than curiosity, because a lot of, if you talk to philosophers and stuff, they'll say the certainty doesn't exist on a spectrum, right? And so it's certainty is sort of binary. It's you are or you're not. And so I think one way to think about it is actually getting off of, I had a conversation with somebody about this a couple days ago. So getting off of certainty and the spectrum, rather than being, although I can see what you're saying from curiosity to, that's a different spectrum, but what I would say is getting off of certainty and going onto a spectrum of confidence. And sort of once, and even if your confidence is sort of, whatever, 99.9%, you still, it's that micro space of doubt that creates the space to like have a broader conversation. And so
What's your confidence level?
Yeah, once you're talking about confidence, and you can talk about sort of the second order, like, well, how confident are you in your confidence? That's fine. Like then you're in the space where you can have that conversation where it gets, and I would say like I think there is overlap with kind of personal conflicts and conflict resolution. And I think this is why, you and I have talked about this before, sort of the overlay with conflict resolution more generally. I think that what gets harder is when you layer on these topics that are particularly heated. So anything that touches identity, inequality, racism, harm, freedom, intent, all that stuff, it just sort of like amps it all up. But I think that there are a lot of similarities. The other thing I would say is that, part of what's hard is that a lot of times what you're talking about, and I don't know how this, I'd be interested to hear how this compares with the conflict resolution space, but with heated issues, a lot of times what you're talking about with the role of certainty is it's certainties that people don't, it's not a skill that people are familiar with when it comes to sort of peeling it back and figuring out what those things are. Like we are not taught to do that. And so it's like it's the unknown unknowns, right? Was it Rumsfeld who said that, right? Like the unknown unknowns, and sort of you don't even realize the thing that by the time you realize, oh, I'm certain about this thing, you're already like halfway there. And so it's kind of leaving the breadcrumbs close together and figuring out, well, what is that thing? So, and the place to start is anytime you have that visceral reaction of like, this person is an idiot or some kind of horrible person, is understanding that always comes from certainty and figuring out what is it, like what is the thing that is under there. So I mean, I could talk through examples if that's helpful, but I want to make sure that I'm leaving time for questions or whatever. But I think that's it's hard though.
Yeah, I want to, if I could circle back, because you reminded me that the original example that you brought up of, let's say, like as a good example, the gun control issue, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about sort of downstream effects from certainty. So certainty is a sort of psychological construct or state, if you, and then sort of downstream of that, we start getting into some of these more we make these issues contentious because of the certainty. And then I was thinking, like, when you were talking about this example, gun control on one side, let's say gun restrictions or no gun control on the other side. It seems to me that if you go beneath those, I might call them solutions, to the need that those solutions are trying to solve, we might identify like the same need. Like everybody's just trying, okay, how do these people over here and these people over here, they both want their families and themselves to be safe. How do I think we need to be safe? Get guns off the street. How do the other person thinks, that we're going to be safe? Let people have guns. Like, so it's just like the methodology is the thing that people get so certain about. And then the need underlying the methodology, maybe people are actually aligned on. Does that sound?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes that's the case. I mean, I think with something like gun control, it's almost like something like you could say like something like gun control. Yes, people would like less gun violence. And so in that, I don't think that works for every issue. And I know there's a question, Ashley put a question there, so I want to come back to that in a second. I don't think it works for every single example. So in some cases, in some cases, I think part of what happens is that we're not very good at being specific about what it is we're trying to, what success looks like what is the thing that we're trying to. So for example, like I just wrote this, I think you saw it, the thing I was in the Chicago Tribune today, or sorry, yesterday, it came out yesterday. And part of what that was about was some policies in Illinois. One of them is about, this is in the Champaign School District here, a policy that is going to be voted on in December for the Unit 4 schools about shuffling around elementary students in an attempt to sort of desegregate. There's a lot of issues around the school district here. I'm not an expert on it, but this is something that the school board is going to be voting on in December, with the goal is to desegregate the schools, right? And so there's a question about, so going back to your point with gun control, everybody's kind of wants to be safe, and so there's overlap in what people want. In a case like this segregation example, yes, people want, I guess, yes, people want a good education for their kids. But this sort of getting to the granular level of what does that mean? What is defined by a good education? What are we going to do when these values and interests conflict? What if the policies that promote diversity or desegregation are the same policies in this, I'm just talking about an example here, are the same policies that actually worsen student outcomes for some people? Is it still worth doing? Maybe, I don't know. Like that's, but we don't have that conversation because
those kinds of questions are important.
Right, those are the questions that, and so there's a piece of it that's about precision and sort of like clarity. What are we doing, and what are we going to do when values and interests of different groups collide? Because pretending that they don't collide that doesn't work, because everybody sees through it.
Well, and also when you're stuck in the certainty trap, it's like it precludes you from asking any questions. Like we're certain, there's no reason to ask any more questions if we're certain.
Right. Why would you ask questions? You have all the answers. Like you don't need to ask questions anymore. One of the things I would just come back to, you said certainty makes these things contentious. I think that's partly true. I think part of what happens that I think it's an interesting question, what makes a particular issue contentious? I think a lot of it is, certainty, there's sort of this whole feedback loop. It's contentious because, right, like which is the chicken or the egg, whatever. But I do think that a lot of what makes these topics contentious is because the stakes feel high. Yes, we don't, so sure. Right, like when the stakes feel, I was just writing this example the other day for something like, if somebody tells me that they like to put, cereal in their soup, I'll be like, that's kind of gross, but I'm not gonna probably get super excited about that, partly because whatever, you want to eat cereal in your soup, that's fine, you do you. Like, I'm not going to demonize that person, I'm not going to judge them, and there's nothing at stake here. Like, okay, you eat the doggy cereal, that's kind of gross, but whatever, like there's nothing. And so there's something about the stakes feeling high, which is why the issues that are most sensitive to this can vary over time and space. Right, because
so maybe,
right,
do you think that the higher the stakes, the more people are prone to this certainty trap?
That's a good question. I don't know. I'd have to think about it before I felt comfortable answering. I don't know. Like if I could think about a continuum of someone is saying yes, Layla is saying yes, I think so. Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure. Like I don't know if I don't know if it's sort of a step function or if it's like a linear function that just goes as the stakes feel higher, like it just
you get more certain.
Yeah, like I'm not sure. I'm
pretty certain like soup would not taste good in cereal. Like I feel pretty certain about that. The stakes aren't very high.
Yeah. No, the stakes are very low. Right.
Yeah.
Right. But then I don't know how you would quantify sort of how high someone feels the stakes are. So it's almost more of a usely thought experiment than something I would probably try and quantify. An example of what's under certainty would be helpful. Not totally sure what the question is, but like here's an example. Yeah.
Well, what I was thinking, because I had a similar question when I was thinking about this. I think this is what Ashley meant, and Ashley, please correct us if I'm wrong. But is there some? What creates this? We just talked about maybe high stakes, but what maybe psychologically creates this certainty? Is it a bias, or is it like sort of a number of different cognitive biases kind of coming together, like confirmation bias and some black and white thinking?
I think there's so many reasons. I think we incentivize certainty we
Mm.
incentivize it through social media. We incentivize it. Certainly if you're running for any sort of elected office, we incentivize it. We don't reward nuance. We like simple message. I mean, goes back to, Daniel Kahneman's work and system 1 and system 2 thinking, and sort of, we like, it's simple. Like it's easy. Like when I can be certain, I can just say, done, like put that thing over here. I don't have to think about it anymore. I don't have to, like, I mean, it's way
It doesn't take any more cognitive
oh
bandwidth.
God,
It's just
like, thank God I can go and, put a cereal in my soup and get on with my day. Like it's much cognitively, it's much easier. It's just easier to go through the world like that. I mean, I had a student one time who, this was last year, I think, and she was like, by the end of the semester, we've been talking about this stuff for 15 weeks or something. And she was like, okay, but like, where does it end? And I was like, well, it doesn't. I was like, you can't, it doesn't really, I mean, so I had an email exchange with, this is last spring, with Carla Rovelli, who's a brilliant theoretical physicist. She's written books on lots of things, including quantum theory for lay people. And I'm not a physicist, so my understanding is about a fingernail's depth. But he, one of the things that he said in one of our exchanges was, he was like, somewhere between chaos and certainty is where human beings do their business. And I thought I was like, yeah, that sounds about right. And
maybe certainty is driven by our need for group affiliation too, because if I get to be certain about this thing, then I'm suddenly part of this group over here.
Exactly.
That makes me feel,
yeah. I think that's right. I mean, I'll just give an example because I don't think there's another question in there right now, but
we're just running out of time.
Yeah, I know we're running out of time. I have 4 minutes or something like that. Do I have 4 minutes?
We're technically 5 minutes behind anyway, so we're supposed to start at 3 for the next one. But
okay. All right. Well, I'll just give an example and then I'll wrap up. So like one of the things, to make this concrete is if you ask a group of students, for example, in this case, you could do this with other groups too, but I've done it most often with students, and you say, why might somebody, what is useful about the idea of white privilege? Just, I mean, it's nothing, again, I'm using this as an example, like it doesn't have to be white privilege. You could do this with a billion other things.
Yeah.
And, they'll say things like, well, it helps us think about the ways that, racist continues to be a barrier in everyday life. Or they'll say, it helps us think about the importance of unearned advantage, things like this, which, I mean, frankly, seem perfectly reasonable to me. And so then I'll say, well, why, that's good. That makes sense. Like, why might somebody have concerns about this idea or object to it, or, however you want to word it? And the first thing that people will usually say, at least in a classroom setting, is they'll say something like, well, they're trying to deny racism or something like this. And which is fine. Like I have no problem. That makes sense to put on the list, but then it's sort of like, okay, well, what else? Is there anything else? Like, can you think of anything else, any other reason? Like, and so then once you start that conversation, and I'm not making any claim about that the people who are trying to deny races, that they don't exist. Like, there's nothing that I'm saying that suggests that they don't exist. But what I'm saying is, okay, now we get to the point where we have 3 items on that list, or 4, or whatever. And if all you know about the person is their opinion, what do you want to conclude about what's driving their opinion? And what are the different implications if I behave as though it's this, or this, and sort of walking them through, like, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Like, what kind of, scale it up? What does that mean? So anyway, I know you're tight on time. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, I think that the takeaway is, can you help people get out of the certainty trap and onto the spectrum of confidence? Like how, and then in that spectrum of confidence, they can create potentially other things outside of the box that they're certain about, just to start thinking curiously.
Even without changing their mind. There's nothing in what I'm saying that says people have to change their mind or even necessarily let go of what they're certain of, but you do have to name it. Right?
Yeah.
So, and that's not as easy as it sounds.
Yes. Well, thank you. I mean, this is, I love these types of talks because it's so, and to me, it's very interesting. I think we get a lot of interest too.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
Yeah. Thank you for being here, and we'll have to catch up soon.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Ilana.